Alrighty, I'll go ahead and start. You've received some criticism with Charles Ryan and that deal. Can you talk a little bit about step by step, the process behind that decision and why you came ultimately to that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with what the law requires. The law requires that the person intentionally place another in reasonable apprehension of their life or serious injury. And I reviewed all of the body-worn camera. I reviewed the police reports. I also looked at the medical records that were created that night. And what I saw was an individual who was highly intoxicated, who had taken Ambien, who had suffered a recent head injury, who was out of it to the extent that he shot his sink, which is what brought officers to the house. And then in reviewing the body-worn camera, what I saw was a man who had a gun who regularly would walk around with a gun to patrol his house because of his past employment. And he did not ever intentionally point the gun at the officers. He waved it and it crossed over them, but there was no deliberate act of pointing the gun. And based on that, it did not meet the statutory requirement of intentionally placing another in fear using the gun.
And what would you say to those who claim that this was special treatment? What is your response to that?
Everybody that comes before my office is going to get the same treatment, and that is we're going to review the case and we're going to look at the law and then we're going to do the right thing. And in this case, that was the right thing.
Can you explain a little bit more just on this case, how that extradition works? So yesterday I was on the phone with your office and it was kind of explained like the Lori Vallow case, where first he's going to have to face the charges here. Can you just kind of explain that for us?
Well, as you know, in the Lori Vallow case, she was tried up in Idaho and then we extradited her here. But since this individual, Mr. Almansoori, is here, it is our intention to proceed first. He is in custody. He's being held without bond. And so other states that may want to extradite him for charges such as New York can file their extradition paperwork.
Sound of freedom.
Yeah. God bless America. Anyway, other states that have charges that they want to proceed against Mr. Almansoori can file their paperwork, but we're going to proceed her first. And then they can extradite him.
And then yesterday we also spoke to one of his victims out of Florida, and she said she felt like the justice system failed her. Can you just kind of tell me a little bit about your thoughts on how he was able to get away from that case in Florida and then continue his crime spree throughout the next couple states?
I would refer you to Florida to ask those questions. I haven't, taken a deep dive on that as to why they did not file charges right away. So I don't want to comment on that. But what my job here is to make sure that these victims feel like they have received justice here, and we're about doing that.
You mentioned New York is somewhere you didn't feel like, or at least Manhattan, had always taken as tough a stance as they needed to on violent criminals. If this were a murder charge from somewhere else, would you be open to extradition?
Typically, we would go first just because these are serious offenses. If this were less serious offenses, I might be open to it, but I certainly am not open to it given what I've seen coming out of the Manhattan DA's office.
And obviously he's had run-ins with the law here in Arizona before and was on probation for a while. I know there were some filings that he wasn't fully compliant with a lot of the probation requirements and yet was still released off probation, I think in 2022. Was everything here done by the book? Or did something go wrong?
I've seen that, and I know that the charges that had been here in the past had been certainly nowhere near the level of seriousness that these are. So I would have to refer you to the probation department as to, why they chose to not revoke him to prison, but let him off probation. I don't know.
Attorney Mitchell, has your office had a chance to review the recommended charges in Baby Skylar's case? And can you talk a little bit about what prosecuting a cold case looks like compared to a recent crime?
Sure. We are aware of the case. We have looked at it, and we'll be issuing information on that very soon. Obviously, when you're looking at a cold case, you want to make sure that you have all of the necessary witnesses that are still available. This happened in, I believe, 2005, so we're talking about 19 years ago. We want to make sure that the evidence is still intact and that we have a chain of custody. So those are all things that we have to look at in advance of filing a cold case. It is a different type of prosecution, but we are aware of the case.
Does your office have any updates on Preston Lord at this time?
Yes. So the last time we spoke, we had just sat down with Queen Creek and walked through the entire case. We've now done that with Gilbert PD because obviously they're handling cases that are on the periphery of that and have information. I think we're all on the same page. We have a course of action that we're taking, and hopefully we can wrap this up very soon.
When it comes to teen violence, what sort of challenges does your office face when it comes to prosecuting these cases?
You know, when it comes to teen violence, you want to look at what is appropriate for that person. Obviously, the purpose of juvenile court is to rehabilitate, and so you want to look at, you know, how can we stop this individual from going into an adult life of crime? And but if it's so serious, then we will prosecute them as an adult. And we just have to take a look at those case by case and make those decisions, guided, of course, by the law that distinguishes. There's two of them. I feel very safe. We have to look at the law, which also allows us to discretionarily file in adult court or to mandates that we file in adult court.
And I want to ask about Daniel Cahill. Obviously, there were some issues while he was out on parole. He's now been readmitted into custody with ADCRR. Your office sent a letter, I believe as recently as December 2023, saying, hey, don't let this guy out on parole. To see what happened, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, to me, it was very clear that this individual should not be out of custody based on all of the factors that we laid out in the letter. And so hopefully that will inform decisions that they make in the future.
Is this something you'll continue to push for if he's ever granted this opportunity again?
Absolutely. And you know, he's not the only one that we do this on. We routinely reach out to the Executive Clemency Board and give input to their decision making.
When we talk about repeat offenders, kind of like Almansoori, and the fact that it was also mentioned that he had a gun, this is a constant problem. I think we've asked your office just about criminals who shouldn't be in possession of a firearm getting their hands on one. What can your office do in these types of cases or these types of situations?
Well, first of all, just speaking generically, anybody who has a felony conviction without their rights restored and is in possession of a gun is committing a felony. One of the things that we have done is we've approached Congressman Andy Biggs and asked him to put forward some federal legislation, because one of the things that we're finding is that if people come here from another state, now that's not the situation here, but if people come here from another state and they have a felony conviction, we want to be able to have the adequate paperwork to prove that they have a felony conviction so that we can hold them accountable. And if you look at the paperwork from Arizona, it's very good. It has a fingerprint on it and adequate information. But we see a lot of states, including California, and we know how many people are coming here from California, that do not have adequate information oftentimes, making it very hard for us to prove that in court.
Just to confirm, was there a Manhattan ADA that traveled out here to meet with y'all, and did they waste a trip?
I did not meet with an ADA, but my understanding is there was a visit by one, yes. And how, with this weather, how is that wasting a trip?
Did he reach out to you? Was you in contact with him? Or
I did not talk with anybody from the Manhattan DA's office.
what would be the benefit of them being here if they're not talking with your office? Or
I don't know. I didn't talk with anybody. I spoke with my extradition people, and I directed them that it's our position that we go first.
have you had any? Well, I guess maybe not now, but any reaction to that decision from New York?
I haven't heard any yet. There might be some later.
Back to Southeast teen violence. Is there any updates into the investigation to determine if the Gilbert Goons are a criminal street gang?
I know that they're looking at that, and that's ongoing. It's not just a matter of whether you classify, quote, the Gilbert Goons as a street gang, but you're also looking at individuals, and you're looking at individual offenses. So, you could classify something as a street gang, but you still have to determine whether an individual is part of that street gang and whether the offense that was committed was in furtherance of that street gang. So there's more than just one level of decision making that has to go into that.
When it comes to these cases of teen violence, has your office seen more instances of this over the past several years? And if so, what needs to change?
I mean, certainly we're getting a lot of submittals now from the Southeast Valley, but it's something that I've been talking about now for some time. Obviously what we're seeing in the Southeast Valley involves, beatings and, using brass knuckles, etc. But we have seen an explosion of juveniles with guns. And we actually have approached the legislature, specifically Representative Quan Nguyen, to run some legislation because under the misconduct involving weapons law in Arizona, a juvenile can possess a gun in his or her own home or group home, if it extends to that. And there's no requirement that there be parental permission. And so we've asked Representative Nguyen to run legislation to close up that loophole, because what we're having is parents call police and say, please come get this gun from my kid. Nothing good is going to happen. And the police feel like their hands are tied. So we're trying to close that loophole.
And I think you touched on this just a little bit, but what role can prosecution play in preventing these sorts of repeat violence?
Prosecution can play a number of roles in preventing it. I mean, the obvious ones are we can keep people in custody so they're not out committing additional crimes. We can make it very clear that we're not going to tolerate certain, crime, and we're going to hold people accountable. But we can also educate the public in terms of, we've done fentanyl forums, we've done etching events for catalytic converters, we've done shred-a-thons, we've done community safety events. So we can do all of that as well. And we can also, just make sure that we have the literature out there for people to understand, for example, parents, what to look for in terms of fentanyl as an example. So we can play a big role in prevention. And that's actually my favorite role because, the best crime is the crime that doesn't happen. So.
On that note, talking about fentanyl, there's a bill right now going through the legislature that would basically make it a punishable crime to have one pill. What's the prosecution's standpoint on a bill like that? Because I know a lot of critics say that it would basically log up the system if there are more people who are facing charges for these types of crimes.
It certainly will increase the number of cases, but I know that the police have expressed, concern because if they catch somebody in the process of smoking, for example, a fentanyl pill, they want to be able to do something about that. So I certainly understand the move to do that. But yes, obviously it's going to create additional cases for us to look at. But, my position has always been that our job in my office is to follow the law. And if that's what the legislators say the law should be, then we will follow the law.
Time for one or two more questions.